Today, we'll explore two terrifying cave stories that ended in disaster. In the first tale, you'll see what happens when experienced divers make a single wrong decision. In the second story, you'll witness how even the most expert divers can face unstoppable forces deep underground. Please be warned. These stories contain disturbing content. Now, let's move to Australia in 1973 for an even deadlier tragedy. On the deadliest day of cave diving in Australia, 4 family members went on a diving adventure. Only one came back alive. This is the story of the shaft diving tragedy. Christine M. Millot was a diving expert at only 19 years old. She had been diving for nearly 15 years. Her father was a professional diver in Australia and taught his children to dive from a young age. Christine, Stephen L. Millett, and Glenn were all skilled scuba divers. In 1973, they had each earned the highest scuba diving qualification. Christine was even the current champion diver in New South Wales. The Millett family was a very experienced team. Their cousin John H. Bockerman was also an experienced diver. He had been diving for 4 years, but he was the least experienced of the group. On May 28, 1973, 9 divers planned a 2-day dive at Mount Gambier at the Shaft sinkhole. A tiny hole broke through the ceiling of a huge underground cavern and opened to a water-filled cave about the size of a football field. Inside was a lake 20 feet down. On sunny days, light from the opening created a bright shaft straight down to a pile of rocks 120 feet below. Divers used this light like a compass to find their way. On the first day, the team dropped a rope line from the entrance and 8 divers explored around the main cavern. Robert Smith, the president of the diving club, had been in the shaft more than 20 times. Everyone had agreed to stay at a maximum depth of 200 feet and stay in the main chamber. They hadn't made an official group dive plan or assigned a buddy system. On the second day, Christine M. Millot, Stephen L. Millett, John H. Bockerman, and a 4th diver named Gordon G. Roberts planned to do something different. They wanted to enter the tunnel section on the western edge of the cave. Their goal was to reach a depth of 250 feet. They would go down quickly and come back up fast without spending any time at that depth. They were trying to set a new diving record. This was 1973. Scuba divers were using regular air cylinders. Mixed gases had not yet been created for recreational diving. Technical diving science did not exist yet. Divers were limited by how deep they could go because of nitrogen narcosis. This is when nitrogen in the air becomes dangerous at great depths. The divers were definitely pushing the limits of what was possible. They were testing their own personal limits too. Unfortunately, cave diving was very different from open water diving. Christine M. Millot, John H. Bockerman, Stephen L. Millett, and Gordon G. Roberts were about to discover these differences and face dangerous limits they couldn't survive. Everything started normally. The group entered the water and swam down to the floor. Robert soon felt lightheaded from nitrogen narcosis and moved back to a safer depth. Glenn noticed his airtime was almost up and reached to tap his sister's shoulder. But just before he could touch her, she lunged forward with the others over the ledge into the tunnel passage. As divers surfaced one by one, there were only 4 of them. This was shocking. Some divers went back down to look for the missing divers, but found only Stephen L. Millett's camera and flashlight on the bottom. Christine M. Millot and the others reached the ledge hanging over the deep darkness. She knew she would need to be quick and return with minimal time at depth. At this target depth, the air is compressed so much that each breath uses 7 times more air than at the surface. They traveled over 300 feet down through the narrowing tunnel. As they moved along, their air was getting dangerously low, and nitrogen narcosis was probably affecting them. But the real danger was the silt. The 4 divers in such a small space disturbed the silt that had settled on the bottom for years. The silt exploded into huge clouds of sand. These clouds would take hours or even days to settle. The silt made it impossible to see. Visibility dropped to less than an arm's length. This was the deadly problem. Without guidelines laid down, how could they know how to get out? Christine checked her air and realized she would not make it to 250 feet. Turning back should have been easy, but it wasn't. After swimming back through the cloud of silt, there was no way to know which direction led back to the rock pile and the glow of the ceiling hole. On a cloudy day, the tunnel had no view of the main entrance hole. She reached out in front of her but ran into rock formations. She couldn't tell if it was the wall of the passage or just a boulder on the floor. There was no way to figure out where she was now. The silt had filled the entire tunnel. Her oxygen was running dangerously low. She knew that making it back to the surface would barely be possible if she found the way out right then. In a desperate attempt to find the direction of the passage, she shot up toward the ceiling to escape the silted bottom. Gordon was doing the exact same thing. Both of them were seen in the tunnel swimming to the ceiling of the passage. Their flashlights were sweeping up and down and back and forth. They were trying to see any sign that would help them. There were uneven rocks sticking out from the upper boundary. There was no simple, smooth rock to follow toward the way out. Christine and Gordon didn't know it, but they were trapped in a false dome over this part of the tunnel. Once they were inside, they each spun around and felt along the rocks. They were looking for the way up. Imagine frantically feeling the ceiling and walls of rock all around you but finding no way out. All of this panic, completely blinded by thick sandy water. At this point, they had no way to know which direction was east or west. They only knew they were at the top of the tunnel because bubbles were collected in the many crevices. But there weren't enough bubbles to help them. The frantic nature of their efforts rapidly used up the remaining air. Sadly, they would not get out of that dome together. They ran out of air, became hypoxic, their bodies didn't get enough oxygen, and eventually sank down to the passage floor. During this time, John was seen swimming with purpose deeper into the tunnel. He was going the wrong way. He was very likely suffering from nitrogen narcosis as he swam deeper into the darkness. Stephen had turned around as well, but he was ahead of Christine and Gordon. He too was running out of air. He struggled to orient himself with no rope to guide him through the opaque waters. He was later found with his buoyancy vest inflated. This would have been a last attempt emergency method to get himself to the surface when his air ran out. Unfortunately, he was caught on an outcropping of rocks and never made it to the surface. Despite an exhaustive search by the surviving divers and police, it took more than 11 months to locate and recover the 4 lost divers. It was truly hard to believe that some of the best trained scuba divers could lose their lives in a sinkhole. 2 cave divers decided to film their dive through tight tunnels in Tulum, Mexico. They had no idea that one wrong choice would end their lives. Hans and Stefan were very excited about their dive that day. They came all the way from Germany to explore these caves. Both men were experienced cave divers. Hans had done more than 150 dives, and Stefan had done more than 50 dives. They were confident and felt ready for anything. Hans was 47 years old, and Stefan was 37. Both were fit and healthy. Their plan was to explore the Colimba cenote. A cenote is a pool of water that forms when an underground tunnel falls in. This creates an opening to water-filled tunnels below. The Sac Actun system is one of the largest cave systems in the world. It has many tunnels, passages, and tight spaces. Cave divers love exploring these kinds of places. The water flows from Kalimba towards Gran Cenote. This makes it easy to get out because the water pushes you along. Hans and Stefan wanted to use this water flow to reach Mucha's maze and film the whole dive. Each man brought 2 extra tanks called side mount tanks. They also planned to leave backup air tanks after 30 minutes of diving. These extra tanks would be there if they needed more air. They planned to come back to Kalimba to exit the cave. It was a risky plan because on the way back, they would have to swim against the water current and squeeze through tight spaces to get back to Kalimba. Other diving teams were also going out that day, with each team starting an hour apart from the others. Hans and Stefan entered the water at 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday, November 14th, 2018. They were excited and ready. The first part of the dive had narrow passages and tight squeezes. With their side mount tanks, they had more room to fit through. The boa section required slow and careful movement through rocky passages. Some places were only 18 inches wide. Each man helped the other get through the tight spaces. They took turns holding the camera to film the dive while the other person squeezed through the tunnels. After 28 minutes of diving, they left their backup air tanks. They thought they had swum far enough and had used half the air in those backup tanks. But they were wrong. They had barely made it through the first section of Kalimba. The video filming had slowed them down much more than they realized. They left the backup tanks in a place they normally would have passed after just 15 minutes of diving. They continued on through the rest of the Kalimba line. In the Sac Actun system, there are several main lines that go from each cenote. If divers want to move from one main line to another, they have to put down their own guidelines. These lines show other divers that someone is exploring that path. Hans and Stefan put down their guidelines and also left small plastic clips called cookies. These cookies show direction and tell other divers which way is safe. Even though Hans was more experienced, both men knew the dangers of cave diving. But even the best divers cannot survive without air. After reaching Mucha's maze, the men enjoyed exploring and filmed everything. After Mucha's maze, they had to put down another guideline to reach the main Paso del Laro line. They were 75 minutes into their dive when their dive computers told them it was time to turn around and head back. This may have been the most important moment of their dive. When they turned back, they probably noticed something wrong. They had used air much faster than planned, but they had been focused on filming and did not realize they had broken an important safety rule. Most divers use 1/3 of their air going in, 1/3 coming back, and keep 1/3 as a backup for emergencies. But Hans and Stefan had already used more than 1/3. When they realized this, they quickly turned around and headed back. They removed the guideline between Paso del Laro and Mucha's maze. The video shows that 93 minutes into the dive, everything seemed fine. They were a little behind schedule, but they were swimming at a comfortable pace through Mucha's maze. 7 minutes later, they were removing the guideline between Mucha's maze and the main Kalimba line. They were heading towards the tight, winding passages of Kalimba. That's when they faced a scary moment. They were running out of air. They had to make a big decision. They could either swim against the water current through slow, tight tunnels, or swim with the water flow through large, open passages towards Gran Cenote. Stefan wrote on a special waterproof notepad, "Gran Cenote okay?" Hans wrote back, "No." Matter where out. Their air was running very low and they were starting to feel scared. They had to pick a path and go towards an exit. Even though the backup air tanks were not too far away, getting to them would take too much time. So they decided to take the longer route to Gran Cenote. They hoped it would be faster. At 106 minutes into their dive, they went back into Mucha's maze and moved quickly to the main Paso del Laro line. They swam along the main line towards the closest exit. On the cave walls were large arrows pointing towards the closest way out. They could see these arrows and knew they were going the right way. Stefan saw that his air tanks were almost empty. He was very scared. Hans gave Stefan his extra regulator so Stefan could use one of Hans's 2 tanks. They kept moving, trying to stay calm, but their hearts were racing. When they checked how much air was left, they both felt dread. They swam faster, which used up the air much more quickly than they wanted. As they got close to the end of the Paso del Laro line, they had to strain to pull air from the shared tank. The tank was empty. Stefan's eyes opened wide. He realized what was happening and swam very fast towards the exit. Hans was shocked. His tanks were empty. He watched as Stefan swam away using the last of his own air. They were only a few hundred feet from the hot OTE exit. This was their moment of life or death. The other diving teams had come back to the surface. They did not see Hans and Stefan at Colimba. Some of the other divers went to Gran Cenote to check if they had exited there. Something had gone wrong with their dive. After telling the dive shop what happened, the divers got new air tanks and went back down the Colimba line to find them. They saw a flashlight on the tunnel floor. Just beyond that, lying on the guideline in the middle of the passage, was Hans's body. His mask and helmet had been taken off, and his air tanks were completely empty. The divers marked this spot and kept going to find Stefan. After checking several tunnels, they headed towards Hot OTE, which was the nearest exit. They followed the short path and could see light shining through the water from the cenote above. There they found Stefan's body, just 60 feet from the surface. Both of his air tanks were completely empty. Even with all their training and certifications, Hans and Stefan ran out of air in the middle of a long tunnel. Somehow, their easy swim through the passages used far more air than they planned. Once they passed the halfway point of their air, their fate was decided. No matter which direction they chose, there was just not enough air for both of them to escape alive. Stefan probably had a small amount of air left that let him swim to the Hot OTE exit. He could see the light above, but could not reach the surface. Their deaths were studied using the video where their bodies were found, their dive computers, their equipment, and the notes they wrote. The cause was determined to be gas mismanagement. They should have turned around earlier. They should have known that swimming against the water current while in tight spaces would use more air and energy. In cave diving, the tunnels show no mercy. A single mistake can cost your life. Both of these stories remind us that cave diving is one of the most dangerous activities on Earth. Even with years of experience, certifications, and confidence, divers can face situations where all their expertise cannot save them. In the Sac Actun case, a single miscalculation with air management turned a routine exploration into a fight for survival. In the shaft tragedy, the forces of nature, silt, nitrogen narcosis, and depth, proved too powerful for even expert divers to overcome. These tragic events have led to modern safety standards that save lives every day. But they also serve as a reminder that the ocean and caves demand respect. They do not forgive mistakes.